she's quite talented. She's quite talented in her vision and what she's trying to do.
In my opinion, she's extremely talented. I
Yeah.
was blown away by what she achieved, and I mean, even up to the point where she's probably the youngest director I've ever worked with since I came out of film school.
How old is she? Is she in her mid
She
20s?
turned 24 while we were cutting the movie. She was still 23 when we shot
Wow.
it.
How did you get involved with Watcher, working on with M. Night Shyamalan's daughter? I think her name is pronounced Ishana?
Ishana, yeah, right, correct.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Um,
How-
so I have a friend from Switzerland, Noemi Preiswerk, who had been cutting for Blinding Edge, Knight's production company, for a couple of years on the show Servant, and then got to cut his film Knock at the Cabin. And then when Ishana was looking for an editor quite close to when she was going to shoot, she proposed I'd have a chat with her and she'd have a chat with me and see if that was a connection because she felt we might be a good match. And I think both Ishana and Knight were fans of Elle, the movie I did for Paul Verhoeven.
Mhm.
And we had a great conversation, very inspiring. And obviously they had sent me the script, which I very much liked, especially the way it was written because it was visually written and it also had a lot of sound notes in it. It was like like a cinematic experience. The whole thing read to me like a very cinematic movie. That doesn't always happen, so that was one of the thrills for me. And then meeting Ishana first and Night second was just such a pleasure, and they have such great energy, um, and that's basically how I got involved with the movie.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so she liked what you did in L, and that's how she more or less approached you to see if there's a connection.
That's basically where her enthusiasm stemmed from, as well as the recommendation from my friend Noemi. Yeah.
That's amazing. Um, Based on the script, I'm not going to talk about much about the premise because a lot of people haven't seen it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't like talking about M. Night Shyamalan's movie. I mean, even though this is not M. Night Shyamalan, but somebody asked me what was I having this conversation. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine. He had seen Unbreakable, and I'm like, and I just casually mentioned, "Have you seen Split?" And he's like, "No." Is it good? I'm like, "Yeah, you should watch it." Like, I wouldn't tell him why
No.
is it good, right? So
It, the
yeah,
hard thing about this kind of movie with mystery and suspense is that basically you need to know as little as possible about the movie going in. So it's always a little hard to discuss the movie with people who haven't seen it yet. And I totally agree. I mean, the less you know, the
the
cooler the
better.
experience is probably.
Yeah. What was the script that you read and the film that's out? How similar, if at all, exactly similar or not, were they?
Yeah, they're quite similar. I think they're very close. The biggest thing we did actually is rework some stuff in the third act,
Okay.
where let me just try and put it
I
in sort of broader terms without
sh-
spoiling anything. But
sure.
I think to me, like when you're cutting a movie, the whole thing basically becomes a balance between character, plot, and tone.
Hmm.
Whereas, and I think they might be equally important, whereas and also influencing each other. So finding the right tone for the movie was a thing, then making sure that the whole mystery plot and the whole mystery plot and the whole lore behind it sort of work and make sense, and that you understand enough of it to not detach yourself from the story, but also not to flood you with so much of it that it sort of washes over you and you also may lose track. So it was a delicate balance. And then obviously character, like what drives these characters also in hindsight when you sort of know what the whole thing how everything ties together. In hindsight, it still needs to make sense. So I will say that that was a bit of a juggle. It always is, and especially on this one, I think getting everything and all the elements to balance out was a bit of a challenge, but I think we did quite we achieved it, I think. And then that was like if you compare the shooting script to what we now turned over, it's very, very similar, but there have been some changes to tone and to the way we weave in the lore in the whole thing.
Right. And regardless of the shooting script or the material that you had, uh, and that more than likely happens with every film, just in my experience as well, is that, there are some scenes that end up going out for the reasons of the flowing, for the reasons of it's not making sense, or is it necessary? Is it redundant, right? Was there quite a few of that, or it's pretty much what you guys shot is what's in the film?
No, there's a lot that ended up not in the movie or in a different order and stuff like that. And there is like hundreds of tiny trims and stuff that we juggled around. The one thing I can say is that the movie had um, there were originally two sort of flashbacky things in the whole thing. So the opening sequence where you see a guy running through the woods,
Mm-hmm.
and you sort of get to understand or you get a glimpse of what's happening in those woods. Originally, during his walk, we had these flashbacks to him and his girlfriend in the car. And we started minimizing them because that whole thing just felt, I don't know, it seemed like too much. And we started trimming it down and down and down, and it just became less and less and less until even after a couple of previews where people were responding quite well to it, but still not as great as we wanted to, we ended up taking all of them out. Um, and that changes a little bit of how you get into it, but it also makes the prologue just a little more like a prologue, and it just feels like it's more of a separate um, prologue thing before we actually get to our main character. So that was a big thing. And the other thing is that there are a few flashbacks of our main character, Mina, played by Dakota Fanning, um, in her childhood and what happened there. And
Mm.
that has seen pretty much any place they've had in the movie. We've tried them pretty much anywhere, and they ended up in the places we have them now, which I'm very happy with. But I will also say that what happens in them was actually changed during the editing process. So we flipped some stuff around. I can't really say what it was without
Yeah,
spoiling the
yeah,
movie,
that's
but we
fine.
did significantly change what happened in those flashbacks and how they play out. And obviously where they end up in the movie. And then there's other stuff that I remember is like when Mina, I, I can easily say that she ends up in the woods and something weird's going on in those woods, and she meets a couple of other people there that she ends up sort of having to live with. Um, that first day was always a little bit difficult where people were wondering, why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't she try to leave? Why is she just sort of staying there? So actually what is in the film, the first day used to be the second day, and what is in the film, the second day used to be her first day in the woods.
Mm.
So we did quite a bit of a flip there, and that meant eliminating a scene. It meant sort of juggling around some stuff. But I mean, that happens on every movie, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
that's the kind of stuff we do in editing, and especially with Ishana and Knight and the whole team at Blinding Edge, because they have a wonderful team of creative executives, and our producer Ashwin. All of them weigh in on versions of the cut, and it's like a great creative process where everybody is pitching ideas and we try a whole lot of different things. We do quite a few previews where we test the movie with an audience, bigger, smaller, where we ask them questions or have them fill forums, and usually have focus group sessions afterwards. And that is very, very informative. especially when you're doing something like I would never cut a comedy without it, I think. I would also never cut a suspense mystery thing without it because you just have to check what you're doing
The
still works for
beats,
somebody who doesn't know the
yeah.
whole premise.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the beats are just so important, right? Like where is what
Absolutely.
clicking? And and one of the things that you mentioned about moving around scenes or shots or whatever, in respect to the story, I it is so true because I, I don't like to edit my own films, but one of the films that I did, I can't. The first film I did was I edited it, but then the second one I was kind of like the rough cut, and then I brought in the editor and kind of put it away. But it's always like a process of moving scenes around. And what's so amazing is you think one flow is working, and if you move it around, how is it going to work? But then just somehow things start connecting and it starts making more sense. And that's such a beautiful thing about editing. You know how they say that the film is written three times, right? On paper, during production, and post. But I think the fun there is in post to rewrite the story, I don't personally feel there is much at production. I mean, there is in production and script writing, but just editing, just it's just such because you have everything in your place and you're just juggling it around, and it's such a cool experience. As annoying as it can get sometime, and cumbersome, but it's such a cool experience.
Yeah. So I think the big advantage we have in post production in editing is that what we think we want to try, we can relatively quickly try and then
Yeah.
see what it does. Whereas if you write something and you rewrite something, you can envision how you want to do it and how you want to change it. Someone else has to read it and they have to imagine what it's going to look and feel like. So you sort of have to convey whatever is in your head through words to somebody who then has to create images of it. Whereas we can present something as an actual scene, as an actual reel, or as an actual movie, and say, well, this is what it feels like if we skip this scene and add that beat or add that music there or leave out this line or add this line or whatever. And that's the fun thing about it, right?
Yeah.
Is that you get these immediate results, and everything you do has like an immediate effect on the finished product in a way, or even if it's unfinished, but like on the actual work in progress. Whatever you do has an immediate, like visceral, sensible effect on what it does. You feel it, you see it, you hear it. The impact is really clear.
Yeah, it is absolutely true. And going back to Watchers, so I'm not going to talk about what I thought about the film, but I'm going to talk about the tone. The tone was really so. It's difficult to when you're watching it, knowing it's M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, who's directing this, and to detach yourself from that style. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a similar genre, right? Like that's just the reality of it. But I just feel there was something in there which I cannot pinpoint. And there were some things that I didn't enjoy about the film, but that's not my main thing. But the thing is the tone of the film, she really kept her own voice in there, but at the same time had a little bit of flavor of her dad's style. And I thought that was really cool because it's a really difficult thing, especially in the same genre, not to match, to sort of detach yourself from that. So I think she did a phenomenal job in directing. And then obviously, it comes in post production, it comes in cinematography and all that. So that was really, really cool. I thought the tone was hers, and it was her voice that was coming out as opposed to, her dad.
I love that you're saying that. I feel the same way. Obviously, having worked with her for so long, I think that is something she really set out to do. I think it's something she got a lot of room to do from the production company and everyone involved. she and him are quite. I mean, I got to observe them relatively closely because he was involved as a producer on this movie. He was at the same time when we were cutting. He was shooting his next movie, Trap, that is supposed
Right.
to be that's gonna come out in August.
I'm looking
And they
forward to
were,
that.
yeah, and they were cutting next door to our cutting room. So we were all, and like our assistants were in the same building and everything. So it was like it was just a really close collaboration there. Having seen him, he works in a different way than she does, or she works in a different way than he does. They each have their own sort of sensibilities, and I think she was very aware that she was very clear about what it was that she was trying to achieve, and I think tone and approach, that all those things were very much hers from the get-go. That was something that was important to her. And obviously, yeah, there is going to be that relationship because there is this similar genre, there is this
Yeah.
whole thing with suspense and mystery and twists and everything. There's that, but I mean, the biggest sort of the big thing is that I think both of them basically use genre components and tropes and then try to sort of mold them a little bit or fuse them with something else. So where this movie is basically, it's part supernatural creature movie and it is a fantasy movie as well. It's also a fairy tale, and it's a blend of the two, and that makes it, I think, makes it unique. That was also a difficult thing, right? Because it's not, you cannot compare this movie to many others out there and say, well, that combination has been done and that's sort of, these are the rules that you then sort of have to stick to, or the conventions that people are used to, so that you can make use of what they expect. So whenever you do that, whenever you sort of bend the genre or make a fuse of genres, you have to sort of reinvent it in a way to sort of find where the expectations of the audience are and what you can do to sort of shift them and prep them and make sure that they go along with you. And the other thing I will say is that, I mean, again, I love that you say that she has her own voice in this movie, because I really feel that way too. And one of the things that helps in that sense is that she has an amazing eye for detail on everything, right? So she will find great people to work with, a great cast. She will find a great DP. Eli Aronson did absolutely an amazing movie, amazing work on this movie. We had a great production designer, Fredia. He was absolutely great. And on all these terrains, she brings in great people and then works with them even at the granular level. So she has overarching ideas, but she will also get into like really small granular detail sometimes, right? Not all the time. There's a lot that you as a head of department can contribute and bring to the table, and then there will be some things where she gets like really granularly involved, and that's, but at a very, very good level. So knowing where she comes from and then getting into the details of it also tells you how good of a vision she has about the whole thing. And everybody working with her is inspired by that, right? So if a director has these ideas and can get to the both at the bigger level and at the granular level, and they are connected at your particular discipline, that is just such a great thing to experience, because then you're getting into the nitty gritty and into the detail, and all those details, in my experience, all those details are are the things that add up to what makes a movie stand out in a way, or that contributes to the effect of a movie having that voice, that specific tone, that own sort of entity in a way.
Right. And actually, I'm speaking to Eli today, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. But going back to, I'm trying to think of the way to explain this scene without talking about the scene.
Yeah.
When you said detail, the first thing that came to my mind was um the scenes that sort of take place just before the last act, at a location that's different from others. I think you
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm talking about. there's a lot of details in there, and that I really, really connected with. And it just because you have this environment where they're in, and then things sort of shift a little bit. It just there's so much character. There's so much character, and I think the production designer. I don't know who did the production designer. Sorry, who was?
Ferdy, I forgot his last name.
Let me
His
look
name
it
is
up.
Ferdy. He's Irish. He was absolutely wonderful. He and his team did such an amazing job on the sets and the whole thing that everything looks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna double check what's the name. Yeah, Ferdia Murphy.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, phenomenal job on production design, and you know, you talked about M. Night, you talked about Ishana, and they were cutting separate movies, next room or in the same building. How, you know, even though as a producer, as a director, she needs to be independent, but at the same time, producer is a producer, right? And then it adds a little bit more to the, um, for the lack of better word, drama if the producer is your dad, and how that relationship sort of works and balances out. What was that like as a professional relationship slash personal relationship? Did you see anything like that? Was he involved in the post-production sessions?
Oh, absolutely. Like Knight is so involved with everything he does, also the movies that he produces, and obviously, like as soon as we got like beyond director's cut, the whole Blinding Edge team was involved, and they are absolutely a wonderful, creative bunch of people. And then and Knight is basically a part of that whole team. So he very much gets involved, and I think both Ishana and he were very good at making that a professional relationship first and
Mm,
foremost. Plus, and that was the real good thing about it, is that I found that in on this movie, and it doesn't happen on every movie, but on this movie, everybody who was involved at the production level was at the producer level was so involved in a creative manner and in a constructive manner. And it was never about ego. It was never about me wanting to implement my ideas to the movie. It was about
right,
everybody responding to the movie, pitching ideas, supporting each other's ideas, building on top of them. And that way, I think that was part of the great professional experience I had there working with them, where I really felt that that creative level was well exceptional in my experience.
right.
Obviously, there is the thing that he is her dad, and we were all living sort of working around the same facility and everything. So there was that. Obviously, it wasn't bothersome in any way to me. I mean, I cannot comment on how they must have felt, and it might have been difficult from time to time. But overall, I have to say that I found both of them to be exceptionally professional. And at the same time, I mean, they're very warm and kind people. They both of them are demanding, right, in the sense that they are ambitious and they want the very best and they want to achieve the highest goals. They set the bar real high, but they are also very, very good, both of them, at inspiring the people around them and making sure when you're working on that film, you really feel that all of us are a family. That includes my visual effects editor and my first assistant editor and our VFX producer and his assistant. Everyone just felt part of a family and of a team, and felt involved and appreciated. And that's one of the things they do so well, and that I think helps them achieve things that other people might not be able to, because they don't bring along that kind of energy and involvement.
Right. And one thing I want to mention because this comes up anytime when there is someone involved in a film, whether he or she's an actor or an art director or director, that comes from the film family, right? Like that comes from the film family. And these are the conversations that I have with people, and I've read this on when I was just checking out the reviews after watching the film. The word that kept popping up was nepotism, right? And
Mm-hmm.
my whole thing with that is, and again, this is like by far, just to explain to the audience that Ishana didn't just hop on to direct a film, right? She's been working with M. Night for a while. She worked on The Servant and a bunch of other productions that he's done. So she's worked her way up. Okay, does she have an advantage over other people? Sure. However, and this involves, I think that applies everywhere in every industry. If you make a good movie or if you make a bad movie and if you star in a bad movie, your performance is really bad, you might get one or two chances, and then no matter whose son or daughter you are, you're done. You're finished. And the amount of pressure that you have belonging to that kind of world to be able to live up to that is, I think, very, very tough. And if you can make it work, few times, then people normally just stay quiet and they move on. And then they will still say it's a nepotism because she's making a great film because her dad is involved. The reason I brought that up, it's a conversation I have with people besides this film all the time. That yeah, sure, okay, people have advantage, but you can't sustain that advantage if you suck, for the lack of a better word.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think, based on what I saw in the film, she's quite talented. She's quite talented in her vision and what she's trying to do.
In my opinion, she's extremely talented. I
Yeah.
was blown away by what she achieved, and I mean, even up to the point where she's probably the youngest director I've ever worked with since I came out of film school.
How old is she? Is she in her mid
She
20s?
turned 24 while we were cutting the movie. She was still 23 when we shot
Wow.
it. I hadn't fully realized she was that young, to be honest. And I will say, while we were working, I sort of had to remind myself a couple of times a week that, oh, wait, it's her first movie. Because when you're working with her, there's nothing that indicates that she is a first time director. There was nothing. It was like a second nature to her, and also the amount of preparation she had done, how prepared she was for this, and how hard she worked, and how well aware she was of everything that was needed to get this film to the finish line. I was just blown away by it. I completely agree with you that I don't know. I think she's very aware, much aware
I'm sure.
that she was in a lucky position to do this movie. She might have occasionally thought that, oh dear, this is quite a big movie to be to take as your first movie, which I think just sort of happened more than that it was actually planned. It was just this project that ended up being offered
Yeah.
to her, and it made a lot of sense that she would do it, and she felt a strong connection to it. And then she went for it. I think she was also very aware that it just meant she had to work real hard to make sure that nobody would say that she hadn't earned that chance, or that it
Right.
was too early or whatever. But I totally agree with you, and I mean, it also, like, yeah, nepo babies. I mean, if you want to be if you want to be a fisherman and you're from a fisherman family, that helps. If
Yeah.
you are if you are the son of a fisherman and you want to be a stockbroker, it's less. Yeah, you're not a nepo baby. So it just depends. I mean, obviously, everyone will have their advantages and disadvantages. Some people will be privileged in one way, some will be privileged in another
Exactly.
way. I mean, one of the issues with film schools these days, I think, or that, not these days, like forever, is that in many countries in the world, film is not seen as a regular profession. It's sort of out of the ordinary. So many people will not from their cultural background, and I'm talking like even around me back home in Holland, where I was sort of part of a middle class white European upbringing. Even around me, it was not that common to do something like that. Like, most people would go and study economy or business or whatever because that was the thing everybody around them was doing. I was lucky enough because I was the son of a composer, musician, so that helped a little bit of me already seeing that there were other possibilities out there. But it is, in many cultures and upbringings, it is considered this weird thing, and people don't think that that is something you can actually do for a living. and that also means that sometimes it becomes like these. It's more a thing for upper class or richer people or whatever to go to film school because it sort of almost seems like this exclusive thing that you only do if you can afford to. There's that. I mean, there is so different people will have different privileges, and
Yeah,
and
great.
everybody who gets a chance should be very grateful for the chances they get and try and hang on to them and make sure that you're worth that shot that you got.
It is so true, and I think it's true in every culture. But I find um, in the Middle Eastern culture as well as South Asian culture, it's a very difficult thing. Like I knew that I wanted to do this with my life, like when the first Jurassic Park came out,
Yeah,
right? And it's been like an ongoing uphill, downhill battle, and it always will be, and that's fine because that's life. You have to have battles all the time in order to go up. But it's difficult. Now I have come up with this line, which it took me a long time to figure out. I literally have to say to people when they ask me, what do you do? When I tell them I make films for a living, they don't understand it. But when I say it's a business as well, then they might get it. Because when they say films, they don't associate making money or paying, your income or whatever with that. It's like, oh, it's just like grabbing a camera and off you go. It's like a massive project, just like making a building,
absolutely.
like from
Yeah.
storyboards and blueprints. So, and it's true. It's sad, but at the same time, I think maybe that's what gives us all the motivation in the world to not necessarily to prove to them, but just work hard and keep at it.
I mean, we are we are lucky in the sense that we found something that we really love doing
Yeah.
and then are lucky enough to be able to make a living doing that. And I mean, that is the thing I'm most grateful for, I think, in the world, having that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I consider myself very lucky to be able to do that.
Awesome. No, that's great. Just a few last things.
Sure, sure.
What's next? What's next for you, man?
Not completely sure yet, but the project that is most likely to start in a couple of months is a new film by director Martin Koolhoven, who a couple of years ago did Brimstone and before that did Winter in Wartime. They're Dutch international co-productions.
Okay.
And he's doing a film noir set in Indonesia at the time of Dutch occupation, just after World War II. So that is a pretty exciting project that that might be the next project that I get to hop on too.
That's awesome. I think you worked on him on Brimstone, right?
Yeah, yeah, I did Brimstone. I did all of his feature films ever since we met in film school. So I did Brimstone with him. I did Winter in Wartime and everything before that. Yeah,
That's awesome. I actually was just going through your IMDb. So you worked a little bit on, at least that's what the IMDb says, additional editor on Creator.
yeah, I was on that for about 10 months or so. That was
Oh, so you would that,
such a huge enterprise. Yeah, I started on there as an additional editor during the shooting, together with Joe Walker, who's a friend of mine, who was cutting the movie, and it was just a ton of footage. So before the movie started, he asked if I wanted to join in and help him out throughout production during the shooting period. And then he had to leave to do Dune. And another editor team came in, so that was Scott and Hank came in. Scott Morris and Corwin came in with their team, but then they asked me to stick around for a bit because I knew the footage that well, and then I got to linger around that project for quite some time. But that was a movie that was in post for a long time, so I was on it. Well, I'm saying 10, maybe it was 8 months all in all or something, but over the period of between January and December of that year. Yeah.
great. That was actually a great film. I really, really liked that film a lot. And I'm a huge fan of Gareth Edwards.
Yeah, he is amazing. He is such
Yeah,
a talented guy.
he is. I would actually love to chat with you, maybe even Joe, if you guys can hop on for Creator just the next, whenever you guys have time. That'd
Sure,
be
sure. Drop
awesome.
me a line. Yeah.
Wonderful. And just to This is something I asked in the beginning, and lately I've been sort of going all over the place with it. How did your journey begin in the world of films? I know you said your dad was a composer, but what was that moment? Like for me, the catalyst was when I saw the Jurassic Park trailers, not even poster. Like I didn't even see the movie for 16 months, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. But what was that moment that made you?
I think it was a year when I saw E.T. and the Neverending Story in one
Oh,
year, probably
I love
in
them.
cinemas when they were released. And both of those made were so involving that I wanted to be in film. And I originally I thought I want to be an actor.
Ah,
And then later was like movies like Back to the Future came after that. I think was one of the movies I saw over and over again. There was this Dutch movie called The Lift, the escalator,
okay.
the lift, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was like a horror movie. They did some sort of like an American remake called Down around 2000 or whatever. That wasn't as great, but that was just a very scary movie that I really liked, and I was sort of interested in how they were made. And then in high school, I started to act in the theater, but I also did lighting and stuff, and I directed a little bit. But I always felt attracted to movies and TV, both of them. So I always wanted to get into film. And then at some point, I got a chance to start making little movies with a couple of friends in college, and that sort of when it took off. And then when
That's
I
fun.
got to editing, that was because the other thing I was doing at the same time when I was still in school was in high school was I was DJing and cutting up like quarter-inch tape tracks to cut up
Nice.
to do remixes and stuff, and use record players to mix and everything like that. And then when we got to when people showed me how editing was, like editing video footage at the time, that just was the click for me because it was everything, and it still
Yeah.
is. Like I mean, it's the creative joy of being able to juggle around sound and picture to your heart's content, and at the same time use that to wrangle performances and tell a story and be able to involve people in a story. That's what triggers me still to this day, which that is the thing that is still most fun to me.
It's amazing that you mentioned Never Ending Story and E.T. I mean, E.T. a lot of people like, but not many people talk about Never Ending Story as they should because it's one of the most amazing films ever
It's such a
made.
beautiful film.
You
Yeah.
know, from effects to the music to the performances, and it's such an amazing film. And I hope they never remake that, but I have a feeling they probably will the way things are going in Hollywood.
Yeah, you always run that risk, but we'll have our version.
Yeah, no, I have you seen the second one? I haven't seen the second one.
The second one I never saw. No,
Yeah, I've never seen either. Yeah. I don't think I will because I love the first one so much. I don't want it to ruin it.
that's the thing. It's hard to beat that sensation of the first one.
Yeah, it was an amazing film. Awesome, Yob. This has been great, man. Thank you so much for all the detailed breakdown and everything. I really had a great time chatting with you, just not just on this podcast, but just a filmmaker to filmmaker.
Awesome.
Amazing stuff.
Likewise, Joanne.